This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Because I want to keep this to a relatively short teaching, I'm not going to be reading all the verses, but they'll be on screen as I reference them. As with all of my end-time teachings, my prayer is to share something that's plausible in hopes it may spur new thoughts on for you as well. When I started learning the Hebrew perspective of the Scriptures, I remember how I was drawn to the Day of Trumpets for the resurrection. But the funny thing is, after all these years later, this is the first teaching I'm doing that discusses the Day of Trumpets as being significant for Yeshua's return. There are two plausible variations that I currently see as possible in regards to the Day of Trumpets being a role in the end times. First, the resurrection takes place on the Day of Trumpets, with the wedding of the new covenant happening on the Day of Atonement. Or, second, the Day of Trumpets could be the wake-up event, as seen with the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. Then, the resurrection and new covenant is on the Day of Atonement. I can see either of these two playing out. I find myself going back and forth between the two, actually. I currently lean to the Day of Trumpets being the wake-up event. Then we are to watch and pray for him on the Day of Atonement, just as the Hebrews would watch for the high priest to come out of the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement when they were praying. Thus, they were watching and praying on the Day of Atonement. I expound on this in my 15-minute teaching titled, Afflict Yourself, the Day of Atonement. This teaching is very relevant to this topic, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Also, the 18-minute teaching, the Day of Atonement and Prophecy. These two teachings go hand in hand with this one today. So, could the Day of Trumpets be the day when the 144,000 are sealed, and then everything starts? Could the Day of Trumpets be the resurrection from what we see in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4? Here we see Yeshua come down with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. You might be questioning what the significance is here. Well, the Day of Trumpets in the Hebrew is actually Yom Teruah. Yom Teruah means day of shouting. If it was the Day of Trumpets, it would be called Yom Shofar, but it's Yom Teruah, the day of shouting. So these verses in 2 Thessalonians chapter 4 could easily be pointing to the Day of Trumpets just the same. Another element why we should be considering the Day of Trumpets is the order of the holy days. Here they are in their order throughout the year. Now, Yeshua's ministry ended out on the exact dates of those in the spring. At the close of his ministry, he rode into Jerusalem on the 10th day of the first month. That's the day the Passover lamb is chosen. Though it may not specifically be an appointed time, there are instructions for this day regarding the Passover. Then we see he was crucified on Passover. Then he rose from the dead on first fruits. And he sent the Holy Spirit on Shavuot, Pentecost, also called Feast of Weeks. Up to this point, he's done everything on cue to the day. Doesn't it make sense that he would pick right back up in that sequence of the holy days to continue his ministry? The next holy day is Yom Teruah, the day traditionally called the Day of Trumpets. The command regarding this day says, "Say to the Israelites, on the first day of the 7th month, you are to have a day of rest, a sacred assembly, commemorated with trumpet blasts." The Hebrew for trumpet blasts is teruah, shouting. Again, that which is traditionally referenced as the Day of Trumpets is the day of shouting. Yom Teruah, not Yom Shofar. So, could this be the day he gathers his bride to him? The day he seals them in for a sacred assembly? Then they're made spotless for the wedding on the Day of Atonement? Then he spreads his tent over them for Sukkot, as noted in Revelation chapter 7. In this light, it's plausible to see how the Day of Trumpets is the next day for Yeshua's ministry to pick right back up where he left off. Plus, as I noted in our teaching, the 1-year tribulation, the often referred to phrase, time, times, and half a time, is actually moed, moedim, and chatzi in Daniel chapter 12. Moed means appointed times. This verse is referring to the time when the holy people will be shattered. This is also discussed in our 18-minute teaching, The Day of Atonement in Prophecy. So, it will take 3.5 appointed times for his people to be shattered. This is the time of the tribulation. The point being is how these Moedim, mentioned here in Daniel, could easily be referencing all the holy days surrounding the 3 feasts. The 3 specific feasts are unleavened bread, Shavuot, also called Pentecost, and Sukkot, tabernacles. These are the days the men are to appear before Yahweh, as mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 16. Now that which surrounds these days would include Passover and first fruits in the spring, along with trumpets and the Day of Atonement in the fall. Thus, the 3 Moedim gives us a year tribulation, and it concludes in the midst of a moed after the year. If this is indeed the case, it adds to the probability of things starting on a future Day of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, the time when it could all begin, according to Daniel chapter 12. So, could trumpets be the wake-up event, or the actual resurrection? Well, we don't know, but it seems this day could truly be the time when things begin. Another interesting element to the Day of Trumpets is how it falls in the season of the grape harvest. This is rather significant to me. As I mentioned in our teaching, the 400 of Abraham, we see the grape harvest mentioned by several prophets regarding the end times. That being Micah chapter 7, Joel chapter 1, Amos chapter 8. The end of summer is when grapes are harvested. When looking at Isaiah 18, it seems to imply before the grape harvest. But the words before the harvest in the Hebrew actually says when to face harvest, meaning when the harvest is before you or right in front of you. That makes far more sense with the rest of the verse. This also lines up with Revelation in how it seems to appear to be the time of the grape harvest, in verses 14 through 16, and in verses 17 and 18. The big question for everyone is, when could this really happen? When could this really take place? It's hard to not look at things in the current day we live in and ask, would or even could this play out in the year we're in, whatever year that may be? No matter when you could be watching this teaching, I believe it's pertinent to always, and I do say always, ask ourselves if a certain view or theory could play out during the time we're living in. Now, in referencing 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we see how the topic of Yeshua's return continues into the next chapter. Chapter 5 talks about it being at a time when people are saying peace and safety, but destruction will come on them suddenly. I believe this could actually be a reference to Micah chapter 7. In regards to the people saying peace and safety, this obviously brings up the Abraham Accord that was just signed. A rebuttal that gets brought up is, yeah, but Steve, we've seen peace treaties with Israel before, and here we are still. And I completely understand. We have the treaty with Egypt in March of 1979, the Oslo Peace Accord in September of 1993, and later the Oslo II Accord, signed in Egypt in September of 1995. And we have the treaty with Jordan in October of 1994. but none of these created a Palestinian state. And, for what it's worth, neither a settlement freeze or a two-state solution with the Palestinians is part of the Abraham Accord. This agreement really seems to be more of a diplomatic normalization between these countries involved. And that's why I can say, I don't know. Is there another one to come? Maybe. But there has been much talk about other countries now joining in since this peace accord has taken place. And nothing says there has to be a two-state solution with Palestine. It just says there needs to be talk of peace. And that is indeed taking place right now from this accord. However, another point of interest to this accord is the coin they made in honor of it. The coin has quotes from the Quran and the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah. The quote from Jeremiah is chapter 14, verse 13. While this sounds good, it's rather concerning. The quote is taken out of context. That which is quoted is presented as something good, but the quote is what the false prophets say. The quote says, "I will give you lasting peace in this place." Sounds good, right? But consider all of the verse. It starts with Jeremiah saying, "Ah, sovereign Yahweh, the prophets keep telling them, you will not see the sword or suffer famine. Indeed, I will give you lasting peace in this place." Thus, the false prophets are declaring peace. And this is what they put on the coin representing the Abraham Accord. They're quoting the false prophets. Now, consider Yahweh's reply to Jeremiah in this same text. Verse 14, "Then Yahweh said to me, the prophets are prophesying lies in my name. I have not sent them or appointed them or spoken to them. They are prophesying to you false visions, divinations, idolatries, and the delusions of their own minds. Therefore, this is what Yahweh says about the prophets who are prophesying in my name. I did not send them, yet they are saying no sword or famine will touch this land. Those same prophets will perish by sword and famine, and the people they are prophesying to will be thrown out into the streets of Jerusalem because of the famine and sword. There will be no one to bury them, or their wives, their sons, or their daughters. I will pour out on them the calamity they deserve." I personally find this rather concerning, especially with it all taking place just days before the Day of Trumpets of this year. Now, whether this is the timing spoken of in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 is yet to be seen. This treaty and Day of Trumpets could pass like all the other ones just the same with nothing happening. Time will tell, that's for sure. Lastly, regarding trumpets of this year, 2020, I'd like to point to our teaching, the 400 of Abraham. The Day of Trumpets this year is exactly 400 days from the first day of Sukkot of 2021, which again points to the one-year tribulation. To understand the significance of this 400-day period landing specifically on these important days, please see that teaching. Regardless of the year and the calendar you follow, I believe the Day of Trumpets is definitely a time we need to always have on our radar for a time of watching and praying. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.